Greetings, YouTube. I don't know if it's because of the influx of Hyperion as a Map 5 mini-boss, or maybe even Morningstar for that matter, because her power does increase pretty significantly fairly quickly. And maybe even, I don't know, Map 5 Scarlet Witch with some power drain of her own. I don't know. Power control not as much on that fight, although it does help. But I have received an influx of requests from, I would call them upper middle class players, people who are maybe uncollected but are going now trying to complete Act 5, or maybe, lower class players who are not anywhere close to becoming uncollected yet, but they're proven now, and they just want to know what the best power control champs to rank up are. Now, some of this is going to be obvious, and then some champs are going to be kind of just my personal preference. As always, I don't want you to agree with 100% of everything I say in every video I make. Then you would be like a robot. And this is supposed to be a channel of constructive criticism, of open dialogue, of data, and not of a cult-like mentality. So I always love when people are like, Prof, thanks for your offer reviews, even though I don't agree with them 100% of the time. I'm like, thank you for not agreeing with them 100% of the time, because I would be freaked out if that happens. Now, when it comes to these kind of videos, the fastest way I know how to make them is just by going through each class and talking about some power control beasts. So in this case, that's exactly what we're going to do, because it will hopefully not take up too much time. And at the same time, it will be hopefully beneficial to you. And also, let's just make sure that's the last time I say the word hopefully in this video. So we're going to talk at first about the science class. Now, you might be surprised to know that I think Quake is arguably the best power control champion in the game, besides Dormammu, who we'll talk about. Because Quake, when charging her heavy attack, actually negates power gain. You can see this against champions like Mordo and Hyperion. And in general, it's just a very solid strategy to control the power of a fight. And for those of you who are really struggling with Bane in Act 5, I should say, Quake play is worth mastering, especially if you have a 5-star, because that is a secret to my success when I fight any Bane node. I will say that part of what makes this a little frustrating, if you are fighting those Hyperions and certainly those Mordos, if they get to a special one and you're still holding the heavy, unless they get those concussion charges and actually become stunned, and you can do this with Mordo, by the way, you can risk still holding the heavy and being countered with a special one or a special two, and that has happened to me before. So that is kind of my warning with Quake. Besides Quake, Void can be a power control champ, but that's eventually once Void does what Void does best, and that's lay on those debuffs. And then besides that, Luke Cage is a power control master, especially against Morningstar. Luke Cage is a boss killer for many in my alliance whenever there's that Morningstar mini-boss of Map 5. And then scrolling down, any honorable mentions here? Really, I guess some people might make the argument, depending on your preference, that you can do some damage with Captain America Infinity War. I haven't really found that out the right way, so I'm just going to move on. And we're scrolling down, and we're going to move on to the next class so we don't waste time. And we're going to the skill class. Now, here's the deal with the skill class. It's got some great champions, but power control is not what this class really does best, other than one of my most underrated champions in the game, and that's Mr. Hawkeye. You spam that special one, you control the power, you have him awakened and against a champion that is not bleed immune, and you can do some crazy bleed damage. Got deep wounds maxed, even more crazy bleed damage. But in general, Hawkeye really is the only champion that I would throw out for this. I have heard some people in the past say Gwenpool deserves some love with this category after a certain amount of hits, but I haven't used Gwenpool too much, so I can't even confirm really if that's true or not. So in the comment section, those of you who use Gwenpool routinely may want to comment on that. But in terms of power control, that is basically the champion that I would like to talk about. Hawkeye, and that's it. We're moving on. Moving on to the Mutant class. And I will say, when it comes to power control, this class, again, isn't the best for champions. You have somebody like Iceman, who, when you have that ice armor active, can only take 5% max damage. And so that works, similar to Gwenpool's Awakened ability. But at the same time, it's not really a power control ability, you know? Rogue is certainly a champion that deserves praise in this class for power control. Unfortunately, unlike the special ones of, say, Hawkeye and even Iron Man Infinity War, who we'll talk about in a second, Rogue is a champion that needs a special too. So if you're looking for a mutant that needs a special one, especially if there's like a special one power lock, you're going to want to use Psylocke. Psylocke and Rogue are MVPs for power control of this class. They shine in ways that they normally are outshone in other categories of the class. So Psylocke and Rogue are both awesome power control choices. Scrolling down, looking at some of the other options, those are really who I would recommend. And once again, if that is the case, let's move on to the next class and not waste any time. The Cosmic class is another class that has some straight bangers, but power control, no, not as much. When you scroll down to look for Cosmic power control champions, I'm really hard-pressed to find one that I would recommend like I would the other champions. Am I overlooking somebody? Perhaps. But that's just not what the Cosmic class is here for. It's here to do really great damage, to have... I think the Cosmic class is the MVP so far of 2019. You look at Cole Obsidian or the new Captain Marvel, and gosh, it's just a great class. But not in terms of power control. So we're moving on to the Tech class, a class that does specialize in power control, especially if you wailed out at some point, and got OG Vision awakened, because the two Visions remain some of the best power control champs, particularly OG Vision if you have him at a high sig. And notice that I am blessed to have him at Synthesis level 200, but it took well into level 100 before I saw that kind of power control that I was hoping to see and that I was used to seeing out of the 4-star. So that's the biggest problem with OG Vision, and because you can't get him out of a crystal and you can't up his sig 20 sigs like you can with so many others, it's 6 stones or bust, and that can take a long time for that to happen. Now, Iron Man Infinity War, similar to Hawkeye and Psylocke that have already been mentioned, can spam the special one, and you can really enjoy that power control. And for that matter, I think he is very underappreciated for power control. I also think, to a certain extent, Red Skull can be a power control MVP if you block and have his ability up, but notice that it is a finite amount of ability to reduce power at times, and you have to build it back up, and it's not something that you can rely on. I would also be heavily mistaken if I did not talk about Stark Spidey. Speaking of power drain, and I certainly love to do a special one, and then while the enemy is stunned, do a heavy that drains the power. This does have some cooldown, but is one of the most amazing power control options, and Stark Spidey is also a MVP for some of my alliance mates in fights, including Morningstar, but because of that bleed damage, especially Scarlet Witch, just hopefully not being inflicted with too much poison. Star-Lord can do some power control, but it is RNG dependent on the special too, so really not as reliable as the other champions I have mentioned. And again, I'm sure there are some champions. Doc Ock is a power control beast if you can use him right. The Tech class really does have arguably the most power control champs in the game, but I'm trying to make this a overview, not something that we spend 20 minutes on. Shout out also to Civil Warrior, poor man's power control MVP, especially that special 2. And Civil Warrior was my best power control champion for a while. Now, the Mystic class just heard me say that the Tech class is arguably the best power control class, and they would like to hold their beer because they have a great argument for being the best power control class. Magic is still in so many books, if you can get to that special 2 and keep refreshing it, the best power control champion with specials. But if you don't have the ability to have power, if your power is locked, we just don't talk enough about the power control abilities of Dormammu and that double medium that, of course, it's a medium attack, so it does not rely on any kind of special attack for that extra power control option. People will say, well, Ebony Coleslaw was made for power control. Yeah, I still hate this champion, and I don't really see a huge power control difference when I try to do power control with him. Now, maybe I'm just not using him correctly. Certainly that has happened before. But in general, a dud majorly. Scarlet Witch can also be a nice power control champion if you get that RNG to cooperate. Dr. Voodoo, I would be, again, remiss if I didn't mention him because of that special 2 and being able to continue to drain, what is that, on an even combo whenever you land that special 2, I think it is. Gosh, that was a ton of information. I'm sure I overlooked some champions, but we're already at 11 minutes, and this is longer than what most of my videos I like to put out are. So this is for a brief overview of those of you who are just trying to figure out champions in your roster who are power control MVPs. This is not meant to be the end-all, be-all of this conversation, but rather the fire and the spark that starts a bigger conversation, hopefully in the comments section. Whew! So many words, so many minutes. I better end this video now because your time is precious and important to me. Thanks for watching. Good luck on all those power control nodes that you need these champions for.